almost not needed to introduce him, but I'm going to do it anyway. Jeremiah Grossman agreed to come from California all the way here. Jeremiah is the founder of White Hat Security. Before that, he was the CISO of Yahoo. He's one of the innovators, one of the original founders of the whole AppSec field. I got into the field a little bit late, into the AppSec field around, I think it was 2002, 2003. I started discovering AppSec. It was a year later till I found out, oh, I don't need to invent this, there are already people out there. And I actually found a really interesting site about a page to show up first in Google results it was Jeremiah's blog. Sorry to disappoint you, by the way, it's not number 4 anymore. It's now down to 16. That's what happens when you don't update it. But he's been producing amazing content from the first days of raising awareness of things like cross-site scripting and how that is and all the other things, to one of our not so recent favorites of clipjacking a few years ago. And lately he's been talking a lot about software assurance, which I found fascinating. A lot of great content. Jeremiah is really one of the original AppSec people that we're talking about here. That's why we're really honored to have him. And especially when you take into account how busy his schedule is. I think it's like the past month, right? So we're really honored that he agreed to come and speak to us and give us the keynote. Jeremiah, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jeremiah Grossman, founder of White Hat, and thank you, Avi, for having me. And that's probably the best introduction I had. It's getting in the way, but I'll deal with it. Wow, I am really honored and kind of intimidated, actually, so I'll do my best. While I get a lot of credit for being a pioneer of application security, I certainly can't take all the credit. There's at least 2 people in the audience I'm aware of that actually were in the space prior to me and that I learned a lot from over the years, and that's Ori Segal and Amit Klein over here. To describe for you when I got into application security, which really wasn't a term that I remember, even the term web security wasn't 2 words you ever saw together. Way back before I was at Yahoo, I was at a company called Amgen in California. And my job there was to put websites together for systems administration. And I always had a penchant for web development back in '99. It's really the early days of the web. And one summer of 1999, I saw a whole bunch of press releases that came out that somebody had found vulnerabilities in Yahoo, eBay, and Amazon. And I thought that was pretty strange, really, because I thought everybody already knew. I thought everybody knew that these websites had vulnerabilities, but decided not to exploit them. But what I found really interesting was later that the same companies issued press releases and said, we have fixed the issues and we're secure now. Okay, where somebody like me that just likes nothing more than to break things and break software, you know, people have hobbies when they go home. Mine just happens to be breaking up software, and even to this day it drives my kids crazy because I'll rip apart the PlayStations and things like that. So I go home and I sign up myself a new Yahoo Mail account and proceed to try to figure out how to break back into my own account. And in those days, Yahoo was the darling internet company. There was no Google or anything like that at the time. And it took me about 15, 20 minutes to manufacture an exploit, which you might call today like cross-site scripting, and other attacks to break into my account, which allowed me to break into anybody's account really back at the time. And I wrote up myself a makeshift advisory, sent it to Yahoo anonymously because I didn't care about the credit. I had a good job at Amgen and didn't want to disrupt that. A couple of days, actually the next day when I got back to Yahoo, I had an email back from Yahoo saying, "Thank you for letting us know about the issue. We appreciate it. We know you want to remain anonymous, but let us know if we can send you a t-shirt." And I guess that was like the earliest form of bug bounty, right? And, but for me, I was on cloud nine. That was like the happiest day ever. I got to hack Yahoo and I'm gonna get a t-shirt. It was just the most amazing thing ever. And so I'm starting up this dialogue. One of the things that Yahoo said was, let us know if you find any more. So I took that as tacit permission to hack Yahoo. So, over the next couple of weeks, I found half a dozen more issues, sent them over, and started a dialogue. And what I realized only later, when I was communicating, was with the chief of engineering over there, which happened to be David Filo, one of the two Yahoo founders. And so I figured, okay, at that point, when you're communicating over email with a billionaire, you might want to spell check your emails and things like that. So that led to the recruiter calling me and saying, "We want you to fly up to Silicon Valley to interview for a security job." And I had to tell them, I'm not so sure this is a good idea. I have no degree. I have no formal training in security of any kind. I've never read anything about what you guys do. And by the way, you're Yahoo, showing my inferiority. And they said, "No, not a problem, just fly up and interview." So I get there and I get grinded on for 8 hours straight with every asinine security question that they could figure out. I'm sorry, how the slides going? Nobody's reading it. Just bring the backpack. Oh, the laptop's there. So, pardon me for one moment. Oh, I need the... We're a little unprepared, so... Sorry. Do not want to show what's on my screen right about now. That would not be good. I'm sure you guys would want to see it. I don't want you to see it. There we go. Almost there. Okay, there it is. So they can switch it now. You guys can switch it now to the screen. Is it happen up here? No. It's not there. It's there. It's not there. No. Somebody call IT. All right, so hopefully we'll figure this out real quick. But so they grilled me for 8 hours straight using every questions that they could dream up, like please define default deny for firewalls and how many runs of crypto does DES do, and I know the answers to absolutely none of it. And I figured I bombed the interview, but I was okay with it because I was going to go back down to Amgen and play a whole lot of Quake as a Unix administrator does, and continue what I do. Still no. Okay. So I guess I gotta continue with stories. But when I get back to Amgen, they gave me, a few weeks later went by, and they got in the mail this big yellow piece of paper with a job offer from Yahoo, offering me triple what I was making at Amgen. So I proceeded to drop out of electronics school, quit my job, and move to Silicon Valley to be the web security guy at Yahoo. My business card actually said the hacker Yahoo, which is like the coolest job description business card anyone might have. And my job was to hack everything in sight. And what's another interesting thing is I got to work with a lot of impressive people over there. I got to work with the guy that wrote the book on regular expressions. He's worth umpteen $1 billion now, but if you know the name Jan Koum, wrote WhatsApp. He was on the security team at Yahoo, you know, old school ADM hacker, great guy. And so when you get to Yahoo, you have to then figure out how to find all vulnerabilities at all times, because it's really the only way you're going to defeat the system. You want to find everything that the bad guys do. And so finding one issue in a website is challenging, to say the least. So I talked to every expert, I read every book, and the first meeting I ever took from any vendor, I believe it was year two of the three, Amit Klein and Ori Segal, from a company called Perfecto Tech, which is long gone by now. And they shifted me what I think was the first scanner ever, right? The first desktop scanner. And I remember this distinctly because it came on a PC. On my desk, it came on a PC, it was written in PHP, and you proxied your browser traffic through it. I mean, it was the earliest scanner, and it didn't even have a crawler. But for me, you know, it wasn't going to scale to something the size of Yahoo, but for me, this world was fascinating. And it really kicked off the things I was doing over at Yahoo. And I was doing assessments and figured out that somebody had to figure out how to scale web application vulnerability assessments. How do you bring the people, process, and technology together to scan all the world's websites and all at the same time? Wow, I didn't realize it was this hard. How's it going? Oh, are we almost there? Yes, close. Thank you. All right. So now we've gone through the rebellious years. All right, I'm going to tell you a little bit about White Hat. So what I learned at Yahoo was that I didn't find anything that would scale. How do you scale this web security, you know, vulnerability assessment stuff? So I spent about 2 years at Yahoo, and that was a great time. But I left Yahoo to start White Hat. We didn't call it the cloud or even software as a service at the time, but that's really what it was. To be able to find a way to bring the people, process, and technology together to find all vulnerabilities in all websites at all times, to offer our customers a service rather than a product. And that's what we do. We're all vulnerability assessment now. We've done very well over the last 15 years. We are headquartered in Santa Clara, but you know, so Avi mentioned that I came from California. I actually came from further in that, since I physically reside most of the time in Maui, Hawaii, so I'm a long ways away from home. So you can imagine what it might take you to leave Hawaii to come to a place. So for me, this is kind of special here. I only travel on things that I consider very, very important, and so thank you for having me. So in web security, I like to, you know, I'll tell you the things that, you know, everybody asks me, what are you working on? Is it new attacks techniques? I've broken the web attack techniques more times than I care to remember. You know, there are, you know, clickjacking and internet hacking and browsers and all sorts of things, just mostly trying to keep up with these two guys right here. And it's been fun, but these are the 5 things that preoccupy my time now. You know, threat actors. Are they innovating, scaling, or both? The intersection of security guarantees and cyber insurance, which I'm going to talk a lot about today. And vulnerability remediation, because after 15 years of web, we've created 1 billion websites that are riddled with vulnerabilities. And I know a lot of people want to focus on new code and how to make the new code secure, and that's great. But a lot of times I'm preoccupied with legacy code. You know, a lot of times web security ends up being just janitorial work. How do we clean up 15 years of broken web code that runs all our banks and retailers and all sorts of things like that? Software development lifecycle process, how to figure out what security controls actually work, and separating that from the best practices, because we don't have a lot of data there yet. I'm going to talk about those 2 things mostly, and how do we address the application security skill shortage. Now, while AppSec has been around for 15 years, if you've entered today or 5 years from now, do not worry about it. This space is exploding, it is growing, and you really can get out of it what you put into it. You're not too late. If anything, we were just 10, 15 years too early. There's tons of opportunity for you guys out there. Let's talk a little bit for a moment about the threat actors out there, who's attacking our websites, because it's helpful to understand who they are and their motivations. You've got the hacktivists, those that will hack you and laugh at you, have some kind of political agenda, a message to get out there. I don't pay too much attention to these guys. They're kind of like the canaries in the coal mine. They're damaging, they're annoying, but they're not terribly scary. The ones that mostly concern me are the cyber criminals and the nation state actors. The guys will hack you and don't laugh at you. The guys that are after money or surveillance and command and control. What's similar to these guys is that they, at least in a web context, from my experience, will use similar attack techniques, but what separates them is their sophistication and their determination. The hacktivists don't have a whole lot of determination. The cyber criminals and the nation state guys do. This is their job, and they will do this non-stop, 9 to 5, or 24 hours a day, depending on who's paying them. Now, one of the things I like these days, which wasn't around 10, 15 years ago, is we actually have data. If there's one, let's say one piece of required reading in all of information security, I'm going to say it's the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. Write it down, Verizon DBIR. This is kind of like CSI for cyber. What Verizon does when there's an incident and their customers call them, they do incident response and they try to figure out, who did it, who the bad guy was, how they broke in, what they did while there, what they're after, so on and so forth. And they aggregate all this knowledge, hundreds and hundreds of incidents, and they put together this report. And what we're going to focus here just for a moment on the right here is the web application vertical. What this says is, in the financial services space, 31% of them, the bad guys broke in. About a third, bad guys broke in through the web applications. In the IT or information space, it was about 35% of the time. So from this, we can kind of get an idea of how the bad guys physically break into different sectors. And this should inform us in how we go about our jobs, how we perform defense by understanding the offense. You can see, like in the mining space, privilege misuse is 80% of it. That's what they should worry about. So you can see all down the range, and most of the time the business of White Hat, we deal with banks, retailers, and IT, which is where the hot spots of web application attacks are. When we focus in on web application attacks, what kind of attacks are there? Now you'll hear two lists in web security. You'll hear the OWASP Top 10. Show of hands if you've heard of this thing. Great, thank you. Now, that's a top 10. It's a subset of something much larger, something that we've been developing over time, not White Hat, but something called the Web Application Security Consortium, what we call the threat classification. It's about 50 some odd attacks, attack techniques to break into browsers and websites and proxies and things like that. So this is the list. The OWASP Top 10 is what's possible but not probable. This is what the bad guys use. 50% of the time, according to Verizon, when a web application gets attacked, it's because of stolen, use of stolen credentials. 40% of the time, it's use of a backdoor. But the 19% is interesting to me. So 19% of the web application break-ins have something to do with SQL injection. Now, SQL injection, the first time it was ever talked about was Christmas Day 1998. Still out there. So 20% of the time. I want you to remember that 20% mark because I'm going to give you some other stats later. Now, you read the news, I read the news, and hacks go on all the time. Most everybody's website is hacked or has been hacked at some point in time. Now, I'm going to start calling out the security industry in this talk at this particular point, because I want you to read this, because this really instructs us what's going on out there. According to Gartner, the information security space consumes $75 billion per year, and it grows at 5%. This is what the money that's used to defend us. $75 billion, probably to continue losing hundreds of billions of dollars. So something is going on here. We're probably not overspending, but we're certainly not spending on the right things. So this space is climbing, but it's only climbing at 5%. Here's the vulnerability likelihood. What this is data from White Hat. So we scan websites on a daily, weekly basis. This comes from about 63 of the Fortune 500, as I mentioned earlier. The last 10 years of data. We're scanning our customers' websites mostly on a routine basis, daily, weekly, whatever they want. Now, this is 2014 data. So the way to read this is, if we just look at the third bar here. So over 2014, 47% of the sites that we looked at had at least one instance of cross-site scripting. Probably more than that, but at least one. The other one, let's say down the range there, SQL injection. So remember I mentioned SQL injection, 20% of the break-ins? We're only seeing the vuln appear on 6% of the websites. One, maybe more. What happens is the MO of the bad guys are going to target a secondary or tertiary website, a website that you probably didn't know you had. They're going to establish that as a beachhead using SQL injection, and then they're going to pivot around your network to get something that they truly care about. So the bad guys get to choose what they use, not us. Prevalence doesn't necessarily translate to risk. When we find a vulnerability, we tell the customer where the vulnerability is, what URL, the parameter, how it's exploited, how to fix it, how bad it is, and everything about it. It then becomes the customer's responsibility to fix it. A code update, a patch, or firewall, drop the website, remove the link, whatever they want to do. From the time we find it and report it to the time they fix it, we get an average time to fix. What you're reading here is an average time to fix in days by industry. How to read this is, let's say you're in finance and insurance. That means by the time we report a vulnerability, the average time to fix is 160 days. 160 days. And these probably represent the more secure companies with respect to web security. That's the problem we need to solve. Now, if you want to innovate in this space, you want to make a real difference, you figure out how to shorten these numbers. Now, when you take time to fix, remediation rates, and vulnerability volumes, I like this particular stat a lot because it's called window of exposure. When a bad guy wants to break into a website, how many vulnerabilities do they need to exploit? Excellent. So the question is that how many days of the year is there one vulnerability open to being exploited? And then you got a window of exposure. So the way to read this is 2014, 60% of the retail websites that we are assessing had at least one serious vulnerability exposed, openly exposed, every single day of 2014. There was never a day that they weren't exposed to something. Now, that's the bad news. Those are the guys that aren't doing so great. But there are people that are doing very, very well. So let's say we look at finance and insurance. 17% of the websites we looked at in 2014 had a serious vulnerability exposed less than 30 days of the year. So somebody has something figured out. So when I want to learn about web security, I go talk up to those guys, the guys that do well, and I also talk to the guys that don't do so well, and try to figure out the differences between them so we can understand what works and what doesn't work in web security. Now, when the losses happen, because this is what the business wants, when you say, I want to buy a scanner, I want to buy a web application firewall, I want to get security training for the developers, the business will always ask is, well, what's the risk? If we get hacked, what do the losses mean? This is why the Verizon DBAR is very, very helpful. It's instructive because we get some guidance on what the losses are. So here's how to read this. The average, let's say you're hosting 1 million records, you can expect in a break-in, in a breach, the expected loss should be $1.2 million. And you can read the rest of the chart. So we get an idea by record of what the losses are, so we can make some rational choices when it comes to security investment, whatever they may be. But if you also notice that the entropy here is pretty wide. The expected averages are pretty tolerable, but the swings are pretty vast. So the average might be 10 million records at 3 million, but it could be as high as 5 million. Upper prediction, maybe 73 million, it's hard to tell. All right, now we got all these vulns. We got all these vulnerabilities open. The time to fixes are terrible. The remediation rates aren't what they should be. And we got millions of dollars in losses. Now, here's where it gets, you enter the psyche of the information security officer, right, the CISOs. What's in their mind? If this is a survey done not too long ago, it said 71% of the security professionals said their networks were breached, 3/4 said their networks were breached, and about 1/4 of them said their networks were breached more than 6 times, right? So that's pretty astounding. But here's where this one really got to me. 52% of them said their organization will likely be successfully hacked in the next 12 months. Extreme apathy. They figure half of them figure no matter what they do, they're going to be hacked in the next 12 to 18 months. I think we can do better than that. So now, if you know about web security as they do, and you have this feeling, what's the next thing that you do? What's the next thing that the business does if you think this is in your future? You buy insurance. So this is a relatively new space, and it's very fragmented, it's all over the place, but it is a very hot market and it is very, very real. Now, as of 2014, at the end of 2014, there was $2 billion spent on cyber insurance, growing at 67% per year. Compare and contrast that to, compare and contrast that to information security. InfoSec is growing at 5%, Cyber insurance is growing at 67%. Think about that for a moment, that the business is opting not to invest their dollars in security, but in loss prevention. That should really concern us. I'll give you some examples here of some of the payouts that are going on and who's using cyber insurance. Everybody's here has probably heard of the Target hack. It was major news inside the US. Target spent nearly $250 million, or at least they budgeted nearly $250 million after the break-in to deal with their losses. Their cyber insurer will pay out about $90 million. Similar with the Home Depot breach, they had about $43 million in expenses, and their insurer was going to pick up $15 million. So if anything, the market is underinsured, which will take into account why the growth rate is sky high. Last one here, Anthem, another major healthcare operator got hacked. They allocated 150 to 200 million, and it's just a lot of money. And their cyber insurers that are getting into the market are all over the place, including most recently Berkshire Hathaway just entered into the market as well. So this space is heating up. Now I want to give you a comparison here on the growth rates here, because this should tell us something about ourselves in information security. In InfoSec, if we look at the roughly 5% growth rate, the new business investment in information security, new investment going into our space is going to be about $3.8 billion this year. Compare that against the new spending in cybersecurity insurance at $3.2 billion. It's roughly the same. So dollars are not going our way. We have in our space, InfoSec, we have won ourselves a credibility issue. So when we tell ourselves the business is not listening, that's not their problem, that's ours. That's ours to solve. Consider this for a moment. Anything in any market that we buy, cars, the clothes that we wear, the watches, the computers, everything we buy comes with a guarantee, a warranty, a return policy of some kind. Everything. Unless you're buying it on Craigslist, right? I mean, everything. Except information security stuff. You buy antiviruses, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, or whatever. You buy it, you get hacked, it doesn't work. Vendor says, tough luck. I mean, that's really all it is. Talk about completely perverse incentives. No wonder, or at least this might be one reason we have a credibility issue, and there might be a good reason for this. The last 10, 15 years, we didn't have great telemetry data on the effectiveness of our products. We didn't know what the firewall was doing, or how well it was working, or the antivirus for that matter, in a customer's environment. Really just didn't know. But I think this excuse is no longer tolerable these days, because now in the age of the cloud, the vendors have the data. Whether you're White Hat or Akamai or Amazon and so on and so forth, we have the data. We actually have performance analytics. It's not like the TVs that we buy or the cars that we buy have a perfect performance record. They don't, but they're still able to offer guarantees. If we knew as an industry knew our performance data, we should be able to offer guarantees in our space and start winning back the credibility. And I think until we do that, we're still selling snake oil. At least we're guessing. We guess our products are work. We guess they'll stop the hacks, and I think we should stop guessing. Now, here's the interesting thing. So I started, a couple of years ago when I started doing this research, I just typed in security guarantee into Google, and I got this stuff up there. This is just a sampling of financial institutions that are offering security guarantees. What this means is if you're a customer of PayPal, Scottrade, E-Trade, and somebody takes over your account and you suffer a loss, they'll make you whole. Imagine for a moment that these companies are guaranteeing their security based upon security products that don't. That's just very strange. So I'm thinking if they can do it, we can do it for ourselves. And I can talk a little bit more about what White Hat is in this in a second. But I like this quote a lot from Dan Geer. There are only two products not covered by product liability, and they are religion and software shall not escape much longer. So I'm going to bleed a very fine line here. I don't want to make this vendor pitchy, but anytime I present this stuff, everybody asks, well, what is White Hat doing about it? When you look at pen testing and vulnerability assessment, of which White Hat is very much a part, the entire idea of what we do is we want to find the vulnerabilities and help our customers get them fixed. If they do that, The bad guys should not be able to break into those systems. At least it should be really, really rare. And if we're confident in that and we have the data, there should be no reason why we can't do that. So what White Hat did, what I personally did over the last 10 years, is I looked back in time, how many times did we miss a vulnerability that we should have found that got the customer hacked? I'll be the first one to admit that we don't have a perfect spotless record. We do miss vulnerabilities from time to time, but we're most concerned about the ones we miss, should have found that got the customer hacked. After 10 years, 1,000 collective customers, and tens of thousands of websites, it's only happened about 8 to 10 times in our experience. There might be some known unknowns there, or some unknowns, but it's tolerable. So what we did was we just offered a new program. We said, if you fix all the vulnerabilities that we find, we promise that you won't get hacked. If you do, we'll give you the money back for the service and we'll cover the first $500,000 of your breach costs. Done. First company that has ever, in security, that has ever done something like that. Hopefully not the last. And we're encouraging others out there to do the same. This, I think, is what gives us the industry its credibility back, and I really want that to happen. So now, when you start having these discussions with customers, we get back to the remediation problem. They have to remediate, and they have this very tough time doing so because they go, do you spend developer time on revenue-generating features that don't ship, will for a fact cost the company money? Or do you fix this vulnerability over here that might get exploited and might cost the company money? And no one has come up with a good risk prioritization model for that yet. So we're at a college. If that's a problem that you can solve, you will change the entirety of the industry because no one has anything like this. So what we want to do, what we did is I really want to know what security controls in the SDLC work. We have great outcome data in terms of vulnerabilities, but we have no idea what our customers did, good, bad, or otherwise, to achieve those outcomes. So we issued a survey to our customers and we heard back from 118 of them. We asked them, do you do developer training? If so, how often? Do you have a web application firewall? Great. Do you do adversarial QA testing? If so, how often? And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about accountability, and we started to correlate the results between their outcomes and their controls. And I don't have a lot of time to go into all the stats, and I invite you to read our report, which has it, but I'll go through some of them. I like this particular question a lot. Basically, it asks, when a website compromise happens, which parts of the organization are held to account? 30% said the security department, about 30% said the software developers and executive management respectively. Only 10% said in the event of a breach the board was accountable. But here's where it gets interesting. Now, be very, very careful drawing conclusions from this data. You know, this stuff is very tough. What this says here is that when companies said the board of directors was accountable in the event of a breach, the average number of vulnerabilities found was 10. When the security department was accountable, the average number of vulns found was 25. You can take this in two ways. One, that when the board's accountable, it's more secure because it has less vulns, more than the security department anyway. Or you could say that when the security department is accountable, they find more things, right? There's all different kinds of ways to look at this stuff. We don't have very strong opinions on these things. We have opinions, sure, but what we do have is finally data that we can start arguing over, at least trying to ask more questions to try to get to the bottom of this stuff. And then you can see how it varies across the range. And when the board of directors, for instance, is accountable, average time to fix is 129 days. When the security department or the developers themselves are accountable, it drops to 100 days. Imagine that. The developer who's chiefly responsible for fixing the bug, you make him accountable, time to fix falls. It's pretty interesting. We'll go through one or two more of these. We did this survey once last year, and one of the things that we found is that the #1 driver for fixing of vulnerabilities, why the business fixes and allocates those resources, was compliance. Compliance, like PCI, was a major, major driver. It shifted in the last year, so the #1 driver became risk reduction. Our theory on this is that everybody got PCI compliant over the years, but the hacks didn't stop. Imagine that. And then everybody got wise and said, we have to do this based on risk reduction. We have customers that say, we're just not going to fix cross-site scripting or some other vulns because we only care about SQL injection. For whatever the reason, that's what they find is the most risky. That's the drivers that we're seeing on why issues are getting fixed. So, Avi, how much time do we have? We have time? Okay. We'll ask some questions. I'll wrap up here in a second. But I'm going to go through a couple of more things here. So we started asking these questions, and we wanted to identify, you have these controls, which metrics does it impact? Before I get into this, let's just say for the moment that we have Site A as an example. And let's just say that Site A has 100 vulnerabilities, but they're only exposed one day of the year, meaning they have super fast, as an extreme case, super fast time to fix and really good remediation rates. Now, in that case, I would say it's probably not a developer training issue. And the reason I think so is because when we report it, as an example, they know how to fix it and they know how to fix it fast. And it's not a prioritization issue. It might have something to do with their QA environment. Somebody turns off the .NET request validators or something and then turn it back on. But it's probably not a dev or a training issue. Now, you take that conversely and you say, okay, there's a site that has 10% of, let's say 10 vulnerabilities, 10% less than Site A. But when we report them, it takes them a long time to fix, if they're ever fixed at all. In that case, no amount of QA is really going to meaningfully drop the 10 to like 1. They already have very, very few. It might be a developer education issue that they don't know how to fix the issue, or management has not assigned the resources to fix those issues, in which case the recommendations in those environments are different. So it's very important, I think, for a company to know their metrics, and I'll recommend these three: number of vulns, time to fix, and remediation rates. Now look at what happens here in this context. When we asked them if they did automatic static code review or static analysis during the SDLC, it measurably dropped the number of vulns in production. It also sped up time to fix, but it didn't seem to have any noticeable effect on remediation rates. Interesting. How about if the QA team performs adversarial testing? It seemed to have a positive impact on the number of vulns and a positive impact on the remediation rate, but not the time to fix. So on down the range. Now, in the report, we can get into the gory details and we can argue over the specifics. But here's what I think. I think before we start doing recommending these software controls, we gotta know the company's metrics, because then you can very much pinpoint what control might best affect the outcome and not just blindly train all developers because it's a good idea, right? I don't think that's ever going to work. In which case, I'll just put this slide up here. So this is why I say in AppSec, if there's best practices, I haven't seen one. And I'll define best practice by a security control or a process that improves all metrics at all times, regardless of the environment. I've never seen that one. So before I wrap up here, one of the reasons why I do this after 15 years is because I really like the web. I find the web to be probably the single greatest invention that we'll see in our lifetime. Everybody here will be on the web. Probably everybody you know will be on the web. It connects 2 billion people. This is where we bank, shop, communicate, where we share our most intimate secrets. This is where we learn. It's going to connect the whole world. If it doesn't today, it will tomorrow. And I think something that important, and me being able to play a small part in helping to secure that environment, is a good way to spend my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have questions if you have time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would like to know what your thoughts are concerning cyber insurance, where we see many hacks today are not done directly to a company, but through the supply chain. And how does cyber insurance tackle that matter? I mean, a company can do whatever it can, and then it gets attacked by a third party that gets breached. Is that included in the cyber insurance?
Yeah, I can't answer that question directly because I don't think there is a direct answer. The question was, how do you deal with incidents where a company gets hacked through a third party, and how do cyber insurers deal with that? What I've seen, because I've seen the questionnaires and the policies probably by a dozen vendors at this point, different cyber insurers, and their coverage amounts, how much they cover, under what circumstances and scenarios, varies widely. So the policy that you get could cover the third parties, or it could not. You just have to read it and be very careful about it, because they really, really don't want to pay out, obviously. There is a court case going on now where where a company received a spear phishing email, somebody opened it up and they were hacked, standard practice, and the cyber insurance said, and it looked like according to their policy that it shouldn't get covered. That is not hacking. I'm not going to debate that. It was in the I've read the policy that they said. It actually, according to their definition, it looked right. But this is what we can expect going forward, I think, is those disagreements. Other questions? Yes? So I'm going to kind of summarize the question is the insurance companies going to be working with security providers to kind of monitor the risk and price accordingly? You're absolutely right. Today, no, they're not. They're kind of 5-10 years behind the cyber insurers. They don't even know our language yet. Most of the time, the way they price is the industry you're in and the number of records that you have. That's about the extent of the sophistication. But when you answer their questionnaire, that you open the Komodo on all your IT posture. What I think is going to happen, what they're going to do is twofold. One is when the incidents come in, they're going to figure out what the losses are and compare with the IT security posture of that website, and then start learning from the actuarials that they'll build up over time. So it'll be a learning process for them because the data really doesn't exist yet. And so in the meantime, they'll just charge sky-high premiums until they manage the risk. Now, the second part of the question, are they going to work with vendors? Here's the part that we have to have a very sobering reminder. If we thought PCI was bad with its prescription, wait until the cyber insurance get a hold of us. They're going to tell the customer exactly what firewall to buy or what AV to buy and specifically how to configure it. And here's what's going to be really weird about that environment, is they're going to be right. They're going to have the data. And so, as the security industry, we're going to have to start really working with those guys because they're going to start mandating our industry. They're not going to regulate us, they're just going to mandate us. Let's take one more. Yes, sir?
You mentioned that the expenses between insurance and security and development and all that is roughly half and half.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that it was a problem. In an ideal world, shouldn't the expenses be sort of balanced?
To be clear, the equivalent of net new investment into the space is roughly equivalent, but the world's still going to spend the $75 billion a year in security for the time being, and then the premiums is going to go up much faster, and maybe at some point it achieves parity. What I'm thinking now is the $75 billion or so spent on InfoSec, it might be the right amount, it might be a little low, it might be a little high, whatever, but I think there's malinvestment going on. I think people are buying products, security products and services that plainly don't work and no one can tell. And that part is racing to an end. The cyber insurers are probably, whether we like it or not, are going to point the way because they're going to have the actuarials. So I'm going to stop there. I will be around if anybody has any follow-up questions. I'll be around all day. Thank you very much for your time. It's been an honor to be here.